I'm Jaslyn Sabri, and you're listening to The Truth in This Art, hosted by Rob Lee. This is where creativity matters.
Welcome to The Truth in This Art. I am your host, Rob Lee, and today I'm speaking with a sculptor living and working in Baltimore. Please welcome Sebastian Martorana. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, how's it going, Rob? Thanks for having me here.
Thanks for coming on, or what have you. This is time in the making. We got it. We're here. We're both, well, I'm not bearded anymore, but I was bearded earlier in this week. I'm clean right now, but we're both, in different degrees of bald. So shout out to you. It's like we're different versions of the same guy. You're much more talented than me. So shout out to you.
I don't have a podcast, so I'm pretty, nice. You just score one for you.
Some people say I shouldn't have a podcast. That's in Baltimore, cats and kittens. So I want to start off by, again, thank you for coming onto the podcast, and thank you for carving out that time. See? Yeah. Could you share like your story, like in kind of if it was a movie trailer, right? Could you share your story and describe your first experience making art?
So the elevator version, I guess. Basically, I'm an artist that works primarily in stone. That's my media. I've always been into art, going back to, honestly, this a little kid. I was always that kid in class that could draw. Every class has that kid. I was that kid. I was the kid that could draw. And that kind of developed over time because I did much better basically in school if they let me do drawing. I was intolerable if I was not allowed to draw. I was like the worst child to be around if they weren't giving me something to keep my hands busy. So basically drawing over time developed into all the other media associated. So ultimately I basically went from an undergrad program where I was an illustration major to studying for a time in Italy and deciding I wanted to pursue stone sculpture. And I just thought, this is the thing that I want to figure out. And so I got a job at a stone company while I was still an undergrad. I was an apprentice, I guess technically starting while I was still an undergrad student, and then moving forward for about 3 or 4 years until I ultimately left the stone company. I came to Baltimore for graduate school in sculpture at MICA at the Reinhardt School of Sculpture. And so basically ever since that time, I partnered with Hillgarden Natural Stone, which is the oldest continually operational stone fabrication company in the country, right here in Baltimore.
Yeah.
And so my studio is now basically part of their stone shop. So I'm effectively a freelancer. So I still think of myself as an illustrator. I just happen to be illustrating in stone, which is really what most stone sculptors that people are familiar with were doing. Everyone knows Michelangelo or Bernini, and those guys were illustrators. They were working for clients. They had deadlines. They were working within parameters. They had directives. And that's like a lot of what I do. And then I kind of have of course, my own sculptural art practice for the stone sculptures that are really self-directed. But I do a lot of work that's both institutional, so colleges, universities, ecclesiastical stuff, and then also, again, my own practice, which tend to be in museums and galleries and private collections, things like that.
Wow. I'm still blown away. Hold on. So illustrator and okay. And because I love when people describe their work where it's like, I do this. I remember I did an interview with this artist named Michael Booker in DC, and he was like, I make quilts, but I draw them. And he does kind of this very intricate drawing with pens and like mostly with pens and colored pencils. But the process is very much like he's threading. That's how he does it. And changing the way that you kind of look at it, or even like S.B. Frazier, I remember her describing like her practice in a way of like, oh yeah, I'm making quilts as well, but I'm drawing, but I'm making quilts. So almost the inverse of what Michael Booker was doing. So hearing someone describe something that seems like, no, you're sculpting, you're doing something completely different. Like, no, I'm illustrating.
Right.
That's really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, if you define illustrating as communicating some kind of idea visually, every artist is an illustrator, really. But, I'm just, I guess, comfortable putting that name on it. But that's what I feel like I'm doing most of the time.
Oh, yeah. Especially as a person that's trying to shift. Well, podcasts are art. They're just, it's no, it's art. I have an artistic approach to it. No, it's not.
Right. Well, how are you shifting from what to what? Do you mean from something else to the podcast?
Well, shifting, I guess, the way that it's perceived, where like I think if you're doing a practice creatively, if you have a certain approach to it, a certain skill, time that's invested, like if I went to, let's say, a recording school or something that would be similar to art school in some regards, and how I'm applying that practice, how I'm doing it. Like, I was touching on earlier, some people may say, I've been painting all day. I've been recording all day. Right. And there are a lot more similarities than people often give it credit for. It's like, is it journalism? Is it art? Where does it lie? And I think I like to look at it as art.
Yeah. I mean, it certainly would be, you're like, you're a communications director in a way. I mean, you're a creative, but dealing more or less with communications. You're like translating something from one place to another. I don't have a conduit to talk about this stuff with people myself directly. You're facilitating that. Yeah,
I'm going to put this in a grant application. So thank you, Sebastian. So early on, right? So initially, like doing the kind of like drawing, illustrating, what have you, I had a similar thing when I was younger. I was in class and I was kind of like, I was a decent student, if not good student, but I was kind of like, this test or quiz or what have you might take 30 minutes to do. I was like, yeah, I'm going to do this in 10 because I want to draw the X-Men. And I used to get in trouble for doing that. And I was like selling artwork. And I remember a teacher came by, and this was like, I'm a relatively like big guy, and I was a big kid. And I remember I looked at the teacher. I was like, yo, you just took my drawing. You threw my drawing away. I was a little upset about that. But it was one of those things. So, and always kind of having this creative approach and having this interest. So tell me about like when you kind of like, really knew that you had that like kind of interest in working with stone, and how similar is it to how your practice was or how your process was in doing non-stone oriented work? So like, what are the similarities?
Well, let's see, the similarities. It's interesting. I mean, so the genesis of the interest in stone certainly does go back to when I was a kid, because I was the kid that did that kind of stuff. And of course, I have a family with these relatives, and you know how it is. They find that you're interested in something, they latch onto that. So it's like for birthdays, I was getting like art books and pen sets and, colored pencils and, the tech literally like art texts, the greats from the Renaissance and stuff like that, and I'm a little kid. I would, I wanted Legos and, but I wasn't going to get Matchbox cars and things like that. Instead, I got all these art books. And so I did actually read them. And I do recall that I thought at the time, the most impressive stuff was the stone sculpture, because a child still has a fundamental understanding of what a rock is. I know what rocks are. I played with them, I'd thrown them, I crushed them in my dad's vice in his workshop, stupid stuff. But I understood just, from reading these things, like that's a rock and that looks like this and what? And so the idea of being able to transmute this incredibly rigid material into this other thing that is so fluid and dynamic and looks so cool, I still could fundamentally, even as like, probably 8 or 9 years old, understand that was really, really cool. And so I was like, I want to do that. I want to do that thing. That looks the hardest. That must obviously be the coolest thing to do. So I want to figure that out. And it wasn't until many years later I got the opportunity. But I got the opportunity very early. I grew up in Virginia, which is not usually the sentence that precedes great things about public education. But Virginia had an amazing program called the Governor's School. So I was able to, as a high school student, go for free for a summer to a college to do art. That's it, just art in various disciplines. You can do it in all kinds of things. But you have to apply to it. It's like very competitive. And I lived in Northern Virginia, so it was extremely competitive because you're competing within your own kind of county to make parity, make it fair for the entire state. So but you can apply to this program and it's totally paid for. So I could go. And I was able to do stone carving for the first time at 16 years old. And a lot of people don't have that opportunity. Right. So I was able to get a taste of this thing very early on. And I was always interested in it. So even that carried through into my undergrad, where ultimately I didn't initially jive with the sculpture program I went to Syracuse University. And so I basically took all my electives in sculpture, and my major was in illustration. And so I really liked the kind of process-driven, directed, more or less, I guess, program that illustration provided. Plus, it was in commercial arts, which seemed like a reasonable avenue to follow in art.
Yeah.
But I still was really into sculpture, so I was able to kind of do both of those things simultaneously, and that's really what ultimately moved me in the direction of, like, even when I was approaching sculpture as a stone carver in a stone shop when I was an apprentice, the idea was always to get to the point where I was proficient in doing these things, because even if the art thing didn't work out, which I've been very lucky in, I knew I had, like, I was like a pragmatic kid. There was always like what's the plan B? Like, what, and now my plan B is like my plan A. I get to work on all these awesome projects, and do the art stuff. So it kind of worked out that way for me.
No, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, I'm still like sitting here somewhat gobsmacked of, because I mean, I have other questions that are going to get even more like, so how do you make that? So tell me about with the work that you're doing now, what would you say? Because I find that people, it's a quote that I'm thinking of, that it's hard to separate regular life from what we do as an art practice. And I'm very much a podcaster. My personality is very much that, right? What does your work reveal about your personality?
It's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, what is, when you say I'm very much a podcast, what does that mean?
So I like,
as a personality?
I like getting down to the granularity of it. Like, oh, so tell me more. I like asking people questions. I like doing those interviews, and I have the podcast voice or the radio voice that people will describe. And I'm an audiophile. I'm an audio nerd, unabashedly.
Okay. Huh. Oh, okay. I got that. All right. No, I don't have any of that. I have a face made for radio, so we're good on that account. But I think what the work I do, okay, so focus. Mm-hmm. Somewhat ironically, because it's not like I'm the most organized person or anything like that. There are many people that work in, I think, my field that are incredibly organized. And I'm not like that generally in most other things. But when it comes to my work, sculpture, stone carving, managing those particular kinds of jobs within that field, whether it's historical restoration or new fabrication or something like that, I'm incredibly focused, probably to a fault. Meaning I tend to get tunnel vision, and it's a necessity of life that I work and focus on multiple things, and projects are no exception to that. But I would prefer to focus on one single thing at one time. That's just not something that life affords me. But I think that I can get very focused on something and specifically driven to get one thing done, and one thing done well. And sometimes that's an advantage, and sometimes that's an incredible disadvantage or a huge inconvenience for other people I live and or work with. Yeah. So it depends. But I think that's the thing. I have I guess, I don't know if I call it the ability, but the tendency to get very to get very narrow about my point of focus for a particular period of time.
So would it be fair to say that that's something that's set in stone? Sorry, well, I told you it's going to happen. I told you. I tried to tell you. I tried to warn you.
That's a good one. No, I mean, I hope my wife hopes not. Gotcha. Yeah, we're trying, because I think that's the thing where people talk about, I should back up and say I'm very lucky. Like, I get a lot of recognition for the work that I do. I mean, you contacted me. That's that kind of thing, right? Yeah. But I get a lot more, positive reinforcement about the work that I do in all these ways. But it's important, I think, also to acknowledge that I have an incredible support system behind me for all these kind of things. And in particular, I have 2 children and a wife who have to basically deal with my occasional, it doesn't happen often, but times when there's a big project and it's for a major federal institutions say. And it's like, oh, I've got to have to be in the shop for 7 days a week for 10 hours a day or 14 hours a day or whatever. And so that's hard on everybody else. And it's not very hard on me. I'm very good at that. I'm excellent at working 16 hours a day. I'm really good at it. That's like my thing. But that's not the thing for anybody else in my life. That's very difficult for everybody else for me to just disappear and be in my studio, because my studio is amazing. It's easier for me to be there. So I think that's the thing where I'm good at focusing on it. So that's the thing in my personality, is I can hone in on a thing and just focus on that. And I like to think I can just, whatever that thing is, the challenge that I've like accepted with a particular project, I can do it, nail it. I got it. But there's, trying to balance that with everything else that's going on is really the challenge. And I mean, that's something I try to talk with my own students about, where it's like, be self-aware. That's something you're going to have to deal with later in life. Hopefully you have the opportunity to focus on your work right now. Take that opportunity, because later you're going to have you may not realize it, but your life will get more complicated. You will have more responsibilities if you're lucky. So to kind of to think now about how to kind of balance those things together.
So you mentioned different projects, right? So your work, from what I read, and can correct me if I'm wrong here, you're working in transmuting, using your terms, which I'm going to start using that more. Like unexpected textures and forms, like including like making cushions, bath towels, all types of like things that don't feel like it's that, right? And it just seems like a high degree of difficulty. So shout out to you on that. I really respect when someone is like going outside of the norm. It's like, hey, this is usually soft. It's hard. And really getting into that detail. It takes a lot of precision and a lot of that focus you were touching on there. What is it that kind of taking something that usually has one form, one texture, one like feeling associated with a certain characteristics associated with it, and doing it in what feels to be almost a polar opposite material and texture and feel?
Right. Well, I mean, I think there's something attractive about doing the unexpected. So it would be more of the expected thing to create hard materials out of a hard material, right? So it's not going to be, I think, nearly as intellectually stimulating if I create a brick out of a piece of stone. Now, I've done something like that, but the idea was to do more to it. But the things that really interest me more so are creating textures that visually appear soft, when in fact they're extremely hard. And what's funny about it is there's a way to sculpt these things in such a way that when people come in contact with them, because I like people to be able to touch my sculptures. Museums hate this, but I like people to be able to touch them. And so when you touch something with your hand that your brain is saying this is going to be soft, and your hand encounters something hard, it's extra hard. You like dial up that sensory input because the delta between your expectation and the reality is that much greater. And so I think that's interesting about it. That's something that appeals to me. Plus, of course, it's a challenge because, I can take a piece of stone and polish it flat and make it look hard. Yeah. Obviously, anyone can do that. To make them into very specific or fine forms is another challenge, but to make them into something really soft or that appears soft is a challenge, because basically you're having to figure out how to do that, because nothing, a lot of the work I do is termed hyper realistic or trompe l'oeil or something like that. But I never really think of it that way, because it's really just not. If you look at it closely, I'm having to figure out what form I can make in the material I have based on the crystal structure of the stone that's going to illustrate the visual experience we have with the material that we know, whether it's a towel or a cushion or a pillow or something like that. And so that's the thing that I'm figuring out each time. And that's an interesting part of the challenge, is to figure out like what things in this rock represent the textures in this cloth.
Okay.
And how can I pull that off?
Yeah. I mean, when are they giving you a reality show? I mean, it's one of those things of like Kitchen Impossible. It's like, look, Stone Impossible. I feel like it's there. Well,
yeah, I've been contacted by producers before about that kind of thing. And I tell them, like, it's going to be a real boring ass reality TV show because everything takes so long. It's not like these other Forged in Fire, the things where like I don't have like blast furnaces. Nothing happens quickly. It takes time. So unless they want to set up a ton of like time lapse cameras or something like that, it's not going to be the most stimulating thing in the world. You really got to grind. And that's like, yeah, it's not as well. I shouldn't say it's not exciting. It's exciting to me, but I think from the outside perspective, a lot of the stuff I do, you might look at it from day to day. Wow, that looks exactly the same. I'm like, no, but I spent 10 hours on this one area. I'm like, look at that. Like that area is so different now, but it's not the kind of thing that really is going to make for great, network television.
Well, you know what they do? They add these different pieces of drama, and it's like, oh, like you never work with anyone. It's like, oh, Sebastian, something bad happened at the shop. You're like, no, it didn't.
Well, the shop I work in is full of characters. And that's this is one of the great benefits of being there. But yeah, I'm not so sure that would make the metrics.
True, I get you. So talking about the shop, the studio setup a little bit. Now, I understand that there is, like you were saying, you might work on something that feels like very small in terms of scope in the big scheme of things. Could you tell us about like what does the typical day look like? What is what does your normal day look like when you're like working on a project or what have you? Like what's that morning routine look like? And, really, what is that the day of the artist sort of look like? That's the thing I'm driving at.
Well, the day of the artist starts with the day of the parent. So the day of the artist is getting up in the morning, making sure coffee is made because I want to stay married. Then getting both, I have two boys, making sure they're up, teeth brushed, bathroom routine, clothes on, and then to school. We're very lucky. Our children go to school at a public charter school here in Baltimore. It's 3 blocks from our house. So I walk them to school in the morning. I come home, then I go into the shop. So I don't get into the shop until after I've done that morning routine with them. So puts me into the shop around 9 o'clock or so. Yeah. Now, if I'm working off site, that could be different. So next week, for instance, I'm going to be in New York for most of the week. So I'm out. Everything falls on my wife, unfortunately for her. And actually, the previous week, I was working in DC most of that week. So same, I was skipping out on the morning routine. And I was basically getting into the shop early to drive down to DC to work on something. So that can be a morning. But basically, when I get into the shop, depends on really what's there. It's like what's on the easel, what's on the table, what do I have going on, and trying to balance basically the deadlines I have with the various projects that are in progress. I try to not take on too many things. And honestly, right now, I am just barely getting caught up from the kind of ridiculous COVID world that happened with everything. I don't know how that affected your workflow, but for me, because I work for myself, when COVID started and school shut down, I didn't go into the shop for basically 3 months. Suddenly children were home, and and I was very lucky. I had a lot of projects going on, and I had clients that were very understanding. I said, "Hey, sorry." So I was there. My wife works full time, and she's in communications, digital communications. Yeah. And so basically, she became an emergency worker for her center where she works, and I was just basically everything paused. Yeah. And so things built up during that time. And there were some other longer projects. My projects tend to take place in the course of like years rather than even weeks or months in terms of their deadlines or their arc. So I'm now, when I get in the shop, it's like, okay, what are the things that have the most current deadline? What's most in need of attention? And, where basically what can I put my hands on when? And do I have emails I need to get back to, and that kind of stuff. And I try not to do a lot of that from the shop because I can physically do that from home. But it's hard because in the evening is of course chaos until the children go to bed. So, that's like the day kind of is that way. Yeah. And then when I leave the shop, it kind of depends again on if I'm picking up, kid number 1 or kid number 2, and getting home to get everyone there, to do dinner, bedtime routine, get them to bed. And then that's when third shift starts. Like after they go to sleep, it's like, all right, what emails do I absolutely need to get back to today? Or do I need to post something on Instagram because I haven't done it in a week and that kind of thing.
For the algorithm. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I haven't posted a reel in a couple of days. Like, all right, whatever.
Oh man,
Yeah.
It's an incredibly awesome tool and way to connect with people, but it's such an incredible time suck, and I'm not great at it. So
yeah,
if I start to lag on it, I tend to ignore it and just walk away, which is not great for the algorithm, I guess.
Yeah, and I think a lot of times, I'm a one-man show for the most part, and I have a producer or have an editor or what have you that kind of cleans up my stuff, that it can free me up to be able to do 6 to 8 interviews in a day. This is an aberration, right? But I would say just something as simple, for me, responding to emails or even following up, because I'm reaching out, trying to book guests and things of that nature and doing research and all of that. And I found recently, I think some of the things that come out of this podcast, generally there's a few emails exchanged, there's a few DMs exchanged, but there's not much that you knew about me coming into this interview. And, I researched you. I felt like I was stalking you for months online, but,
I listened to some podcasts, and I felt like the best way to know more about what you were doing is to basically see your art. Which is cool, because and that's the thing, that should be my second gig is podcast, I don't know, reviewer, because I work on a good day, I'm in headphones and basically safety earplugs and a headset because my work is very loud.
Yeah.
So I'm listening to music, the radio or podcasts all day, every day on a good, if I'm lucky. If I'm not lucky, then I'm sitting at my desk dealing with stuff or putting out fires or fixing things and having to talk to people. But this is the most words I've said on a work related thing in a long time. I again, on a good day, I maybe say 100 words, and that's great.
Yeah, that's me in probably a minute. Just me, just yapping through words, and I want to be, because usually I'm if I'm working this is a remote day for me, right, from the day job, and I'm here, and before I'm recording, I've talked a lot today, but if I wasn't recording anything, it's just a regular at home day, I might grunt. That's the noise that's coming out of me. It's not many words.
Right.
I probably will yell at my cat. That's probably a thing that I'll do. I just look at him judgingly.
Well, he's looking at you judgingly because he's a cat.
What cats do. Yeah, cats are dicks.
He or she is a cat. So yeah. Basically their move.
So this is the last real question I have before I get into those rapid fire questions. So you could do both, or you could do whichever one you choose. But what would you say as an artist in your career? Would you say it's a triumph or a challenge or a failure, if you will, that's come to mind or what have you? I know some people will say, "Oh, it's no failures. There's happy accidents and so on." That's Bob Ross. But in either that extreme, the continuum of super successful, super damn, this sucked. What did you learn from either one of them?
Well, I think that in terms of failures that I've had, I know that there's a circuit of various fine art awards and grants and things that I apply for kind of every year. Generally, I think in the last couple of years, actually, I dropped off only because my workflow in terms of my own fine art really slowed for the last couple of years because of COVID and our time suddenly shrinking. I've been only maybe the last 2.5 years really focused on getting my commission work done. And so I haven't been able to do as much of my own fine art as I would like. So it makes some of those things, applying for some of those things a little bit more difficult. But, I for every year, I'll always apply for, say, the Sondheim Award that's here in Baltimore. I've been a semifinalist, I don't know, half a dozen times more. I've never been a finalist or won, obviously, but I'll keep doing it until I do. But in terms of getting my own work done, I think in the realm of successes, I've been able to work on some projects for some public and private institutions, and that I never would have imagined that people would even let me touch these places, let alone literally cut into them with a chisel and a hammer. And so that's, to be honest, that's pretty cool. So I've been very lucky in that regard. And I've been able to work with some people that, you know how it is. It's like you watch the people that trained me were at the absolute top of their game. And then during my time as an apprentice, I would see these movies and documentaries about, companies like the John Stevens shop in Newport that goes back, 300 years. And then a few years ago to be asked to work with these guys on a federal memorial in DC. That's a success in my book, to have that opportunity to work with these people, to meet them, to spend every day for months being part of that team. That's from my book, an incredible success. So I think that's kind of the different ends of the spectrum. There's things I'll always continue to apply to and try to get more work done. And then, but at the same point, trying to keep in mind, it's like, you've gotten to do some really cool stuff, to have things that are in these big public buildings that'll be there, ostensibly forever until something terribly horrible goes wrong. But barring the zombie apocalypse, that's the thing for forever. So to get to work on that kind of stuff, really, like I said, I think more. I know I'm very lucky to get more just recognition and joy out of the work that I physically create than the average bear. So I'm very lucky in that regard. So that's like a success, I think. That's
great. Thank you.
Thank you.
So that is pretty much the end of the real questions. Now it's time to get weird. So rapid fire questions. You know how these work. You've listened to enough of the episodes to know how these work. I might ask you about movies. I might ask you about peanut butter. I don't know.
Man, ask me about peanut butter. I'm on board.
All right. So let's start off with this one. Invisibility or super speed? Which one do you want?
Invisibility.
Okay. When do you know a project is done? And I would imagine sculpture is a lot different from painting. I know that painters are like, I'm never quite done, and it's like, I'm just kind of stop. When do you know, like, your work, let's say, commission work is a little different, but your own projects, let's say, when a piece of work is done?
Like I said, I'm an illustrator. So when the deadline is up, that's when it's done. Because it better be. And if it's not, I won't get more work.
I dig it.
So that's the answer to that question right there. When the deadline says it's done.
It's like, on the paper, in the email it says it's done. Got it.
Yeah. That sometimes that has to be the answer. It's done when the deadline is done. However, it has to get there.
We make work within the time that's permitted.
Yep.
That's the thing. What's your favorite drink?
Well, I'm sitting right next to a gin and tonic right now, but I'm awful partial to bourbon, so it's uneasy.
Yeah, I dig it. Mm-hmm. Japanese whiskey for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Man, I don't know. This isn't very rapid fire, but again, one of my awesome opportunities was to do the Rare Craft tour with the Balvenie a few years ago. I don't know if you're familiar with them. If you like good whiskey, and you like Scotch, you probably are. Yeah, your face says you know what I'm talking about. And I learned so much about both, obviously, Scotch from Scotland and Japanese whiskey, and the history of basically the people that went back and forth between those countries and influenced each other to create what is now this ridiculous craft whiskey tradition in Japan. It's wild.
10 on 10.
Anyway, totally off topic here, but that's really cool.
I've been doing this, and I learned it's a thing. I've really gotten into vermouth recently, and so big shout out to the Wine Collective. And I've been doing this vermouth spritzer, and I was like, look, this is delicious. And I think that you can do a Negroni with coffee as well. So I'm combining just these things I like, because I like the sweet vermouth. So those together, it's just like, I'm just continuing this whole alcohol tour I'm doing. So it's great. It's good times.
Oh, wow.
Let's see. Crunchy or creamy?
Creamy.
Huh.
But I respect crunchy. Okay. I mean, obviously, I'm a stone carver.
I was waiting for that connection. So this is the last one, and this kind of relates to one of the things we touched on earlier. Well, I think before we even got started with the actual interview. Do you speak any other languages? And if so, can you answer in said language?
It's like, sì, ma non molto bene, perché non ho l'opportunità per parlare l'italiano adesso. Mi dispiace.
I feel like it was a couple curse words in there, but thank you.
No curse words. No curse words. Yeah, I can speak Italian very poorly.
Thank you. We're polyglot. You're poor polyglot. How's that work?
Provo.
Yeah. So that's pretty much it for the podcast. So I want to thank you for being on this podcast. And two, I want to invite and encourage you to share anything you feel like we missed in this interview, and tell the fine folks where to check you out, your work, social media, all of that good stuff.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think you covered it really well. People can find me on, generally the socials. I'm obviously most active on Instagram. That's just Sebastian Martorana, which I always say it's just Sebastian Martorana, but it's the longest name in the world. So I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram at, Sebastian Martorana, which is Sebastian Martorana. But my website, much simpler, is just sebastianworks.com. So that pretty well covers that. But yeah, I think that's easy. The easiest way to find me or contact me is either through Instagram, which I think how we first got in touch, and then of course the website. You can always email me through there. That's pretty standard.
So there you have it, folks. I want to again thank Sebastian Martorana for coming on to the podcast. And I'm Rob Lee, saying there's art and big friggin' sculptures in and around Baltimore. You just got to look for them.